Some folks say home is where you hang your hat. But in the West, home was where someone waited for you to come back. That was something Rose Whitmore no longer had. She stepped off the last train into Copper Creek with dust on her boots, a worn valise in her hand, and nothing left except hope that was fading fast. For 3 days, she had begged for work. The boarding house pushed her out. The laundry said no. The general store would not even let her finish her sentence. Folks did not trust a woman alone. Folks did not trust anything out of the ordinary. And Rose, with her Eastern accent and no kin to speak for her, was as out of place as a sparrow in a wolf den. But losing her money was what broke her spirit most. $47. 2 years of saving in Lowell's Mills. Gone to a swindler named Hector Finch, who had written warm letters, promised marriage, and vanished the moment she reached Wyoming. She had nothing now. No job, no money, no place to sleep. She stood on the empty platform as the train rolled away, dragging its shadow like a long black ribbon across the dust. That was when she heard it. Slow, heavy footsteps on the wooden boards, the kind of steps that made a whole street hold its breath. The men at the water trough stopped talking. An old fellow on the porch stepped back inside without a word. Even the horses pinned their ears. Rose lifted her head. A man walked out of the saloon, leading a chestnut horse. He was tall, stood broad-shouldered, eyes the cold color of winter creek water. A scar cut through one eyebrow. His jaw was dark with unshaved stubble. He did not look angry. He did not look anything. He was the kind of man folks feared because no one knew what lived behind his silence. Bo Callahan. Rose had heard the whispers. He was trouble. The kind a decent woman stayed far from. But desperation pushes a person towards strange courage. Before she could think, she stepped into his path. But the horse snorted and tossed its head. Bo steadied it with one hand, but never took his eyes off her. Up close, he looked even harder, like granite carved by wind and years. "Mister," Rose said. Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I ain't asking for charity. I'm offering a deal." He did not blink, did not shift, just watched her like she was a stray blocking the road. "I can cook," she said. "I can clean. I can mend clothes. I just need a roof. That's all." Still nothing. Yet she could feel every stare in the street pressing on her back. Bo finally spoke. His voice was rough, low, like gravel sliding over wood. "You don't know me." "No, sir," Rose answered. "But I know I got nowhere else to go. And you look like a man who ain't planning to stay here long." Something flickered in his eyes, quick and unreadable. Not kindness, but not refusal either. He looked toward the boarding house where Mrs. Henley hid behind a curtain. Then he looked at Rose's hands, calloused and scarred from mill work, the kind of hands that knew labor. "There's a meal house across the street," he said. "I'll buy you supper. You tell me your story. Then we'll see." He walked off without waiting for her. Inside the meal house, the air smelled of bacon grease and boiled beans. 4 tables, flies tapping at the window. Bo sat in the darkest corner. He ordered 2 bowls of navy bean soup without asking her preference. She waited until he lifted his spoon before touching hers. He noticed, said nothing. "Name's Bo," he said between bites. "Bo Callahan. Rose Whitmore." He repeated her name slowly. She told him everything. The mills back east. Her husband Thomas dying from typhoid, saving every penny. The newspaper ad. Hector Finch's soft words. The hard truth of being fooled. When she finished, her hands lay flat on the table. She did not lift her eyes. Bo looked at her for a long moment. You got family back east? None that want me. Friends? Not anymore. He wiped the last of the soup with a piece of bread. Place I got is 2 hours out, he said. Cabin my ma built with my pa. She passed 2 years ago. I've been there alone since. Rose held her breath. She waited. I ain't looking for a wife, he said. Not the way you mean. But I could use someone to keep house. Cook. Tend what my ma left behind. He met her eyes. And in return, you get a roof, food, right in my name if you need it. Rose swallowed hard. Why? You don't know me. Bo looked down at his hands, the large, scarred knuckles, the rough palms. Then he spoke again. My ma came out here same as you. Answered an ad. Traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger. She used to say, the West ain't kind to folks who don't help each other. He pushed coins onto the table. We leave in an hour. Rose watched him walk out into the fading light, but her hands trembled as she pressed them flat to the table. She had not asked why the town feared him, and he had not offered to say, but something in his voice, quiet and worn, made her believe he meant every word. 2 hours later they rode toward the hills, the land wide and empty around them. The sky stretched endless above. Rose held the saddle to steady herself as the horse climbed the ridge. She had never seen so much open space. It felt like a place where a person could disappear, and maybe start again. When the cabin finally came into view, tucked near a bright creek and a line of willows, Rose felt something she had not felt in a long time. A small, fragile flicker of belonging, even if she did not understand why. Rose stepped into the cabin that first evening, and the quiet wrapped around her like a blanket she was not sure she deserved. Dust floated in the golden light from the single window. The quilt on the bed was faded, but carefully stitched. A rocking chair sat beside a small Franklin stove, and a basket of half-finished mending waiting as if its owner had only stepped outside for a moment. On the shelf above the bed sat a photograph. A woman's face looked back at Rose, gray hair pulled neatly, eyes gentle, mouth soft. She did not need to ask who it was. Bo appeared in the doorway, silent as a shadow. It's a good house, Rose said. Ma built most of it, Bo replied. Pa helped, but she knew where everything belonged. Rose touched the edge of the quilt. She had good hands. Bo's jaw tightened. Yeah, she did. He stepped back, letting her have the space. There's a well out back. Privy's past the oak tree. I'll be on the porch. Bo? He paused. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. Winter here ain't kind. He walked out, his boots creaking across the boards. Rose stood alone inside the cabin, feeling the weight of a life she did not yet know how to fit into. That night she lay under the quilt, and the creek whispering outside the window. She heard Bo rise at some point, heard his steps near the door, then heard him walk away again. She stared at the ceiling until dawn. The weeks passed slow but steady. Rose worked the cabin the way she had worked the mills, sweeping, scrubbing, cooking simple meals. Bo left before sunrise most days and returned after dark. They spoke little. 10 sentences a day, maybe less. But every silence was not empty. Some were simply waiting. One early July morning, Bo came to the doorway while she washed dishes. Come with me, he said. She dried her hands and followed him to the creek. The grass was cool with dew, shining silver in the early sun. Bo knelt near the water's edge. See that? She crouched beside him. Fresh deer tracks pressed deep into the mud. 2 large prints and 1 small pair. Doe with a fawn, Bo said. Passed through at dawn. How do you know when? She asked. Dew's settling inside the prints. Well, means the sun wasn't on them yet. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. The land tells you things if you listen. That afternoon, he took her up the ridge, showing her wild onions, service berries, bitterroot. She repeated each name, tasting the words like new food. Then she slipped on a loose stone, her knee striking the granite. Pain shot through her leg. Blood soaked her stocking. Bo turned and looked at her. He did not come back. He did not offer a hand. He simply waited. Rose pressed her palm to the rock and pushed herself up. Her knee throbbed, but she climbed the rest of the ridge without a sound. At the top, Bo looked at her with something different in his eyes. "You'll do," he said. That night they sat on the porch as the sky turned violet over the mountains. Bo whittled while Rose mended a shirt. The creek murmured, the breeze carried the smell of pine, and for the first time the cabin felt less like a stranger's home. Yet she found his mother's sewing box a few days later. When she asked if she could use it, Bo paused as if the box itself carried memories no one else had a right to open. Then he nodded. She'd want someone using it. Rose stitched a tablecloth over the next nights. When she set it on the table, Bo sat down without comment, but his eyes moved across the yellow daisies she had embroidered. Something warm loosened in her chest. The next morning he left early. Rose made cornbread and stew while he was gone. When he walked in at dusk, dripping creek water from washing up, he froze in the doorway. "Smells like my ma's cooking," he said, voice rough. "I found her recipe book," Rose answered. "Hope you don't mind." "I don't." They ate in quiet. When Bo reached for a second helping without asking, Rose looked down at her bowl to hide her smile. Later they sat on the porch again. "Thomas used to say I cooked better than his mama," she said softly. "Good. I think he was lying, but it was a kind lie." Bo stared out at the meadow. "How long were you married?" 2 years, Rose said. "He was a good man." Bo nodded. "Most folks get worse than they deserve." She studied his face, the lines carved by years of weather and something heavier. "Your ma," she said. "What was her name?" "Eliza. Eliza May Callahan." "Pretty name." "Pretty woman," he said quietly. "Tough, too. Pa used to say she could outwork any 2 men. Rose looked at his scarred hand. "She taught you to read the land. Him and the land itself." She hesitated, then pointed at the scar that ran along the back of his hand. "That from a fight?" "Rope burn," he said. "Cattle drive. Long time ago." He did not explain more. She did not press. Later, lying awake in the dark, she realized Bo had come home earlier that day than ever before. And when he stood in that doorway breathing in the smell of cornbread and stew, the hard lines of his face had softened. Maybe just for a second. But it was enough. A week later, Rose rode into town alone for supplies. She met Mrs. Morrison inside Peterson's store, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried blame like a weapon. "You're living at the Callahan place," the woman said. "My son lost the use of his hand because of that man." Rose felt the eyes of the whole store pressing in. She kept her voice steady. "I reckon I know Bo Callahan better than most folks." "You foolish girl," Mrs. Morrison snapped. "You don't know what he is." Rose lifted her chin. Then maybe this town never bothered to. The ride home was long and hot. Dust clung to her skin. Her head ached. That night she told Bo everything. He listened without looking up. "She told you their side," he said. "Not mine." "Then tell me yours." He sighed. "Tom Morrison pulled a knife on me in a card game. Drunk and losing. I broke his wrist so he wouldn't cut me. Sheriff took their word. Morrison money goes far." "And you just let them talk?" Bo shrugged. But a man can't fix every lie folks choose to believe. Rose reached across the table and touched his hand. I believe you. Bo's eyes rose slowly to hers. You're a strange woman, Rose Whitmore. I've been called worse. He almost smiled, but the wind outside shifted, and the boards under their feet shuddered. Bo's head turned toward the window. Storm coming, he said. Big one. Rose looked at the dark sky building above the ridge. She did not know that by morning, the entire valley and Bo would be fighting for their lives. The next morning, the world felt wrong. Bo stood on the porch staring north, his untouched coffee steaming in the cold air. Rose stepped beside him, pulling her shawl close. What is it? She asked. He pointed at the horizon. Clouds were piling over the mountains, dark as wet stone, and heavy enough to crush the sky. Not storm clouds. Something worse. The kind that came after weeks of heat and no rain. The kind that spelled disaster for anyone living low in the valley. Been dry too long, Bo said. Ground's baked hard. Snowmelt's been building in the high country. When it breaks loose, it won't sink in. It'll run fast. Rose watched birds fleeing the valley. A whole sky full of wings, all moving east. Even the buffalo herd below was climbing toward higher ground. The animals know, she whispered. They always do. Bo turned and walked inside. When he came out again, and he was carrying his saddlebags, Rose felt her breath catch. You're going to town. Creek runs straight through Main Street. When that water hits, it'll take the whole place. They won't listen to you, Rose said, after everything they've said. Probably not. He tightened the cinch on the chestnut. The horse sensed the tension, pawing the dirt and snorting. Then why go? Rose asked. Why risk it? Bo paused with one foot in the stirrup. For a heartbeat, yet she saw something shift behind his eyes. Something raw. Something human. Because it's the right thing, he said, and that's enough. Rose stepped to the fence, her hands gripping the rails. Do you have to come back? The words slipped out before she could stop them, but the meaning was plain. Bo looked at her slowly. The sky behind him rumbled. The wind carried the smell of coming floodwater. Yes, he said. I got a reason to now. Then he pulled his Colt from his belt and handed it down to her. In case I'm late. Rose held the gun. It was heavy and warm from his body. She wanted to say something. Anything. But the words stuck in her throat. Bo gave one last nod, kicked the chestnut into a gallop, and vanished over the ridge. Rose watched him until he disappeared. Then she sat in his porch chair, with the Colt in her lap, and waited. The sky darkened. The creek slowed. Even the birds fell silent. And then, in the far distance, she saw it. A long, dark wall rolling through the valley. Not cloud, not shadow. Water. A roaring, churning wave carrying trees, branches, soil, everything in its path. And it was heading straight for Copper Creek. Bo rode into town fast, mud flying from the horse's hooves. People stared as he pulled up in front of the sheriff's office. "Flood coming!" he shouted. "Get to high ground now!" Faces turned toward him, confused, annoyed. No one moved. Sheriff Burroughs walked out, hands on his belt. "Callahan," he said with a sneer. "You looking for trouble?" "I'm trying to save your town," Bo snapped. "Water's coming down the canyon. Big." Burroughs laughed. "Ain't rained in 6 weeks." "That's the problem," Bo growled. Then the ground trembled, but lightly at first, then harder. Dust rose from the road. Horses reared. Windows rattled. And far to the north, a low roar rolled over the valley. The sheriff's smile faded. Bo didn't wait for permission. He ran. House to house, door to door, pounding with his fists, dragging people out when they hesitated. A mother with a newborn, an old man who could barely walk, a boy frozen in fear, a woman begging to save her cat. The flood hit the edge of town like a starving beast. Joe water slammed into Main Street, up to Bo's knees, then his waist. The cold stole his breath. The current shoved him sideways. He braced against a hitching post as tables, chairs, and barrels tore past him. A scream cut through the roar. A small child clung to a porch rail, water up to his chest, tiny fingers slipping. Bo lunged. The current nearly knocked him over. But he reached the boy, grabbed his wrist just as the small hands let go. "I got you," Bo rasped. "Hold on." He fought toward the nearest roof where people were gathered. Mrs. Morrison reached down, tears streaming, and pulled the child from his arms. The water rose higher. Bo plunged back into it. He saved a man trapped by a fallen beam, pulled a woman from a window, cut Tom Morrison free when his splinted wrist snagged on a nail, lifted a family onto the roof of the general store by a rope that shredded his hands raw and bleeding. For 2 hours he fought the water. When it finally began to lower, the sun was sinking behind the mountains. The town was half ruined, but everyone was alive. Bo sank onto the church steps, soaked, shivering, hands wrapped in strips torn from his own shirt. Mrs. Morrison approached with her grandson, the same boy he had saved, clinging to her skirt. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. "Don't matter," Bo said, staring at the muddy street. "It matters to me." But Bo wasn't listening, yet his eyes were fixed on the road leading toward home, toward her. He tried to stand, his legs buckled. Someone helped him up. Someone else brought a blanket. But the only thing he saw was the ridge, where Rose waited. Bo rode through the night, every muscle burning. Twice the road was washed out, and he had to search for new paths through darkness. The chestnut was exhausted, stumbling with each step, but the horse kept going. Pink light touched the sky as Bo reached the ridge. His smoke rose from the chimney. Lamplight glowed in the window. Rose stood on the porch holding a warm tin cup, her hair loose, her blue calico dress catching the morning light. She did not run to him. She simply waited. Bo slid off the horse. His legs failed him. Rose took the reins from his hands. "I'll see to the horse," she said gently. "You go inside." He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. Inside, exhaustion finally claimed him. He woke hours later in the bed, and hands clean and bandaged, blanket pulled over him. Rose sat by the window repairing a shirt. She smiled as he stirred. "There's coffee on the stove," she said, "and biscuits when you're ready." He pushed himself up, pain pulling at every bone. "Town's still standing," he said. "I know," Rose answered softly. "You came back." "Told you I would." She reached out and held his hand carefully, her touch warm against his wounded skin. Weeks passed. The town rebuilt. Bo healed. Denton one afternoon, Tom Morrison rode to the cabin, offering his hand in apology. Then, Mrs. Morrison came with a message. "The preacher will be stopping by next week," she said. "Seems to me you two ought to be married proper." Rose stepped beside Bo, her shoulder brushing his. "We'd like that," she said. They married on a quiet Sunday. Rose wore a simple white muslin dress she had sewn herself. Bo wore a ring made from a copper penny his father once gave his mother. At the creek murmured behind the cabin as they said their vows. That night they sat on the porch beneath a blanket of stars. Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. "Bo, this is home." He pulled her gently close. "Yeah," he said, "it is." And for the first time in his life, The word felt true.